Hey guys, this is the most important video of this series in my opinion, and hence I request you to pay attention and watch it at least couple of times if something does not make sense to you in initial attempts. And in case you still have any queries, then please feel free to drop comments down below and I'll respond as soon as I can. Now rest assured guys is a library to automate API testing, but it can only do what you ask it to do. So if you don't know what to test in APIs, rest assured can do just so much for you. So this video focuses on learning API concepts which you can then leverage across various tools in respective languages like Postman and Axios using JavaScript, requests using Python, rest assured and Karate using Java, etc. So the agenda of this video is on to the screen. Number 1, a technical walkthrough of API server under test. And number 2, what to test in a REST API. Now, these two topics are kind of interrelated. So, before we get started, I assume you have already watched part 1 of the series, since in there I have shown how to set up the API server. Now, to simplify REST API automation testing, I recommend you to always break an API down into these 5 categories and collect information regarding each one of these. So number 1 is request object, number 2 is response object. To master guys REST API testing, you need to thoroughly understand both request and response objects. Since these objects are at core of API development and testing, knowing them well enough will help you work easily with any HTTP client libraries, including rest assured. So we are going to see these objects into much more details in upcoming slides. Then comes request response headers. Well, headers are integral part of both request and response objects, but I want to keep them in a separate bucket purposely. Now, just for knowledge sake, these headers are used to pass additional information between the clients and the servers. Now, then comes endpoints. Now, simply put, an endpoint is one end of a communication channel. APIs work using requests and responses. Now, when an API requests information from a web application or web server, it will receive a response. The place that APIs send requests and where the resources lives is called as an endpoint. So we have the following 5 endpoints in our API under test. Then at last we have middleware. Now, in essence, the API middleware layer plays a similar role as middleware plays in other IT solutions. It sits between the client level and the systems of record, translating the desires of the client into execution within the core systems of record. So we have the following middlewares added to our API under test, and very soon we would see them practically. Well, now let's talk about HTTP request. An HTTP request is made by a client to a named host which is located on a server. The aim of a request is to access a resource onto that server. So if we fail to construct the request object properly, server is unable to entertain that request. Therefore, let's look at HTTP request object into much more detail. Now, correctly composed HTTP request contains the following elements, guys. Number 1 is the request line. Now, it consists of at least 3 items. Okay, the method is a one-word command that tells the server what it should do with the resource. Now, these methods are get, put, post, patch, delete, and so on. Number 2 is the path component of the URL for the request. Now, this path identifies the resources on the server. Third item is HTTP version number. The HTTP version number showing the HTTP specification to which the client has tried to make the message comply. Now, examples would be HTTP version 1.1 or 1.2. Now, a request line might contain some additional items like a query string and the schema and host components of the URL, and we have seen all these in the previous video. Then comes, guys, a series of HTTP headers or header fields. Some common ones are authorization, content type, and accept. Okay. Then comes, guys, the message body. So as you know, post, put, and patch type requests also have a body. Number 4 is each HTTP header is followed by a carriage return line feed. Okay, this one. After the last of HTTP headers, an additional CRLF is used to give an empty line, and then message body begins. Now in this structure, the only mandatory thing is request line. Okay, rest all are optional. So let's see now how the request object looks like in Postman. So we are going to create a new member in our database. Okay, so let me show you the API server first, and then we move on to Postman and create a post request object. So guys, this is my API server, and currently in the database, you see there are 3 records. So I want to add one more record using the API. So let me take you to the Postman. We got to create a new request. The type of the request has to be post since we are inserting a new record. Then you have to provide in the URL. Now URL has got different components. First one is your scheme. Then you have to provide the domain. So in our case, it is going to be localhost followed by the port. Port is 5002. Then we have to provide the path. And path in our case is API/members. Okay, so we have the mandatory data setup in our request object. Okay, then guys, we have to add the body. Now I've clicked on the body. I'm gonna click on raw. I'm gonna select JSON. Now this API uses basic authentication. So we go to authorization and we select basic authentication, and guys, admin are the username and password respectively. Okay, now we are going to do one more thing in here. So we go to pre-request script, and in here I say console.log, and I say show me my request object. So I say pm.request. So I just want to log it to the console. I'm saving everything. Okay, headers, you are since passing the JSON body, so Postman has automatically added this content type for you. Okay, now there is a middleware in this API which checks that if you are sending the put, post, patch request and you're providing the JSON, okay, then you must pass this content type, otherwise it will error out. Okay, so we have our console getting ready. Okay, now let me hit the send request. All right, so you see a new record is created, and this is our response section. Status code is 2001. Let's first check that in here. So yes, the record is successfully added, and now I'm gonna check that in here. So this is my guys request object. So you could see we have the URL specific information, we have the method, we have the body, and we also have the authorization. Okay, so this is our request object. Since everything was set up properly, we are able to make this request a success. Okay, I'm gonna clear this out, close this, and like I was saying, if you don't provide this content type, you send it. This is a smart API, tells that, hey, please send request in application JSON content type format only, and it's a bad request, so server has denied the request. Okay, it never reaches to this particular endpoint. Okay, it was returned somewhere in the middle of the process. Okay, it never reached to the resource. Okay, so guys, these are all the things you should have handy before automating your API testing using any tool of your choice. It's very important to set up your request correctly. Now in testing, we follow the AAA pattern when you have arrange, act, and assert. Now what is arrange? Arrange is you are creating your request object. What is act? You are sending that request. Now what is assert? The moment you get the response, you validate that response. Okay, so we have to arrange, meaning we have to create the request object. Okay, let's move on to our slides. Now guys, this slide talks about HTTP response object in much more detail. An HTTP response is made by a server to a client. The aim of this response is to provide the client with the resource it requested, or inform the client that the action it requested has been carried out, or else to inform the client that error occurred in processing its request. Okay, so we have seen the example wherein I was not passing the content type in my request, okay, and then server said that, hey, your request is not correct. Okay, now an HTTP response contains again 4 items, just like your request object. Now number 1 is a status line. Okay, now the status line is the first line, as you could see in this diagram, in the response message. It consists of 3 items, as you could clearly see in here. So this is your HTTP version. Okay, then this is your status code, which is a 3-digit number indicating the result of the request. So when we fail to provide the content type in the request, in the example that I showed, right, we got 400, which was a bad request. And then guys, you have this reason phrase, also known as status text, which is human readable text that summarizes the meaning of the status code. Okay, then a series of HTTP headers or header fields. The HTTP headers for a server's response contain information that a client can use to find out more about the response and about the server that sent it. Now please note that response headers may also leak information regarding the web server, and we should stop it from happening. Now in the API under test, I'm using a middleware to customize my response headers before being sent over to the client. And we'll talk more about middlewares in the next slide. Okay. Then comes guys, a message body. Okay. A message body which is usually needed for a response to a successful request. The message body contains either the resource requested by the client or some information about the status of the action requested by the client. Now for a response to an unsuccessful request, the message body might provide further information about the reasons for the error or about some actions the client needs to take to complete the request successfully. Now the fourth one is, as it's there in the request message, each HTTP header is followed by a carriage return line feed. After the last of the HTTP headers, an additional CRLF is used to give an empty line, and then the message body begins. Now let me show you the response object in the Postman, and this time I would use a GET request, and I'm going to use the existing one. And now all you have to say is console.log pm.response. Let's open the console again. Okay. And this time, what are we doing? We are accessing the member with ID 3. Let's check that in here first. So we have lion and male. Okay, let's see. So I click on send in here. Okay, and all right, so request was successful, and this is your response object. We have this ID, status, you see the code as well, then all the headers. Okay, then the stream is nothing, it's the body, right? Great. So now this is all about testing so far. Okay guys, now let me also show you the development perspective on these request and response objects. Okay, now things would be more clear to you. Okay, so pay attention. All right, so when I send that request, okay, this is the first file where your request is landed, and you could see in here we have a set of middlewares. So your request first passes through these requests in the order they are mentioned in this file. So we have this logger middleware which is logging all the calls that you are making to the API in the console. Okay, now you can also use this logger and put these logs into some kind of files. Okay, then you have the CORS, cross origin resource sharing. Okay, who can access this API? Okay, so currently everyone can access it. It's also like disabled currently. Then you might have heard about the Swagger documentation. So in this project, I've also added the Swagger documentation. Then guys, next is the rate limit, meaning like in here you see within 20 seconds, you can only make 2 requests. If you make more than that, it says too many requests being raised from this IP. Please try again. All right, fine. So, and more middlewares like simple authentication, I'm checking whether the content type header is there or not. Then you may ask to, have the data in either XML or JSON. So another middleware in place for that. And many more custom headers, like we are excluding, like if I come in here, you see I was saying that these response headers may leak information about the server. All right, so what I've done is I've said, hey, disable this particular one, and I created my own header which says an X powered by QA box, let's test. Okay, and this is funny, I know, but if you go to the headers now, in here you see X powered by QA box, let's test. But if I just decide to disable this one, okay, and since nodemon is already there, my server is restarted. So if I send the request again, let me drag this down slightly. I send the request again, and guys, you see X powered by Express. Okay, so this is a valuable information for the hackers. Okay, so therefore it's important that we don't test these headers in a wrong way. It's important to for the security reasons, hide this information. Okay, once all that is done, then these are your endpoints. Okay, so in here, okay, we are making API members. So we are saying that anytime there's a request which contains this path parameter, execute this controller. Okay, so let me open this controller now for you. Okay, so we have this route in here, and inside this you have members.js, guys. So in here we are doing all the magic. Okay, so I'll pick up the get all members request and explain that to you. So we are saying that, hey, anytime you have API members and this request, right, this is how developers are doing it. They are waiting desperately for the request object. Then they also have the response object, and whatever you get back, right, that's the response object they are giving to you. So let's see that. We are saying that, hey, in the request object, do you see any query parameter? If so, is it gender query parameter? If so, okay, then move inside this code and say, hey, find those specific members. Let me show you what I'm doing in here. So I have this get all female members. So you say, hey, gender female, then you click on this. It only shows you the female candidates. Okay, so this is how it's working. So I'm reading that. So it goes inside this, and then as you could see at the end, I'm saying that, hey, I have retrieved those members who have got the gender female, and I'm saying response.status. I'm setting the status, okay, 200, and I'm then sending the data, okay, like that. And if no such gender, or let's say you can say gender is equal to test, right? We do not have any such genders. So then we say, okay, hey, not found. Okay, member with gender test does not exist. All right. Then if you are not providing the gender, I'll just send the data. I'm gonna look inside my database, and I'm gonna provide you that information. All right. So you see that developers are heavily dependent on already built-in request response object. They just refer to those libraries, okay, and they just work with request response. All right, guys, so this is at the core, like I said, for both developers and testers. Great. Let's jump back to the presentation. So middleware is a software that's assembled into an app pipeline to handle requests and responses. Now each component, number one, chooses whether to pass the request to the next component in the pipeline, or can perform work before and after the next component in the pipeline, as you could clearly see in this diagram. Okay, so request first reaches to middleware 1, does something in here, and then it says next, then only it goes to the next middleware, and so on. Okay, and then in the reverse order also you could see. Now this picture shows that the request pipeline consists of a sequence of request delegates called one after the other. Now each delegate can perform operations before and after the next delegate. Exception handling delegates should be called early in the pipeline so they can catch exceptions that occur in later stages of the pipeline. You can short circuit the pipeline by not calling in this next parameter. Okay, this is again important. So you can typically perform actions both before and after the next delegate. Now we can have, guys, multiple middlewares, and hence it becomes very important to call them in the right order. The order that middleware components are added in the request processing pipeline defines the order in which the middleware components are invoked on request, and reverse order for the response. The order is critical for security, performance, and functionality. So guys, remember this, note this. We need to know the list and order of middlewares being implemented in our API under test. Okay, so in here you see here's a list and the order. Okay, like I said on the previous slide, keep this at the top, exceptional handling. Okay, and then you see, I mean, these are some predefined middlewares. Then you can also create custom middlewares. All right, and then basically once all the logics are passed, okay, then only the endpoint is being reached. Okay, otherwise, you know, your request is returned from that middleware itself. Okay, so I have shown you quite a few middlewares that I've implemented in my project. Okay, so you must be waiting for this. All right, besides model GTO, I believe rest are self-explanatory based on the content I have covered so far in this video. Now let me walk you through model GTO concept using a different API created using ASP.NET Core and C#. Why I have not shared this ASP.NET Core API? Because you need to do a lot of setup. So this member API which I've shared with you, okay, it's much simpler one, you can easily set it up. Okay, but got to understand this model GTO, and hence I'm showing you the other API. Okay, but why do we need this model in the first place? Now, I mean, this is a concept, if you might have heard about model, view, and controller MVC architecture. So pretty much like if you take the view out of it and you just have model and controller, then you end up creating the APIs. Okay, but if you have the view as well, which means that you're creating the web application. Okay, what is a model? The model component corresponds to all data related logic that the user works with. Okay, remember this. Here is that API which I was talking about. Okay, and in here this animal object, okay, will retrieve the animal information from the database, update it, delete it, whatever you want to call it. Okay, how this thing is working, I mean, this thing works with database using ORM, object relationship mapping. Okay, what is that? Another new concept. Don't worry, we'll go there. But in here you could clearly see that this animal model has got certain fields, and I'm in here mentioning it's a key, meaning it will be the primary key when it will get stored into database. And then this name field basically has got these attributes, pretty much like, you know, you have to think it like you're designing a table. Okay, when you're designing a table, you say, okay, hey, create table, and then you provide those fields, and with these fields you also provide the data type of those fields, the size of those fields, and any constraint that you want to apply. Okay, for example, in here you see this is a mandatory, meaning it can't be null. Okay, from the database terminology perspective. Then you are saying that it has to follow this constraint, meaning name must only contain alphabets, no numeric values are allowed. Maximum length is 25, minimum length is 3. Then I was talking about, you know, ORM. So in here you could see I'm using Microsoft Entity Framework as the ORM model. ORM doing all the magic. Okay, then comes, guys, DTO. Now DTO stands for Data Transfer Object. Now this pattern was created with a very well defined purpose: transfer data to remote interfaces, just like web services. This pattern fits very well in REST API, and DTOs will give you more flexibility in the long run. Decouple persistent models from the API model. Some clients may just want to consume, let's say, 3 fields out of this animal. Others may want to, you know, get all, then how are you going to manage it? Because you just return the model. So you basically serialize this model, okay, into the JSON. Just like, I mean, if you might know that, you know, in Java we have the Pojo classes, and then you can convert this Pojo Java object into JSON using serialization. Okay, so same is the case in here. So I've created quite a few DTOs in here. So as you could see, I created this basic one. Okay, I say, okay, in all the responses, this is the minimum that we are going to share, and then we say, okay, maybe for animal read DTO, this is the additional field, and in here you see we have used the concept of inheritance. So this will give me all the fields from animal DTO, and then this one would be added for animal read DTO. So I hope this part is clear. So one more thing before we move on. So we have already talked about these attributes. These are annotations. Now, with the help of these annotations in ASP.NET Core, you know, you can also generate the schema information, okay, using Swagger. So I'm going to start this application, and I'm going to show you the schemas which are being then generated. So Swagger library is gonna read all these attributes and gonna generate the schema in the Swagger UI. All right, so we have all these endpoints. Great. Scroll down. So you have the schemas, and in here you see all those schemas. Okay, so all this is coming from here only. Okay, so let us look at the name one. So it's required, regular expression, maximum minimum length. Let's check that. Name, it's a string, maximum length is this, minimum length is this, and this is the pattern. Okay, so now let's run these tests using Postman. Okay, now guys, the most important test case that you are going to write in APIs is your schema validation. Okay, so this is the schema of the member object. I'm going to say, hey, this is the format. Again, I have a playlist on Postman if you want to check it out. You say, hey, Postman, on the response, check that it has the JSON schema. Okay, and then you provide the JSON schema. So you hit enter. Okay, and your test case is being passed. Let's make a change to this. Okay, and what we say is the minimum length has to be I say let's say 20. Okay, now we know that in case of name, I guess in here we have lion. Okay, the length of that is 4. So I hit enter, and now my test case is failed, and clearly says that, you know, data.name, which is the name field, should not be shorter than 20 characters. So just in one test case, you're checking the complete schema of your response, meaning you're checking the model. Okay, the model of the API under test. It's very important you do this test. Now next test is you have to test the complete body. Okay, I've seen people just testing, you know, part of it here and there. We don't have to do that. We have to test the complete body, and I can understand some cases it's not possible, but I'll say in 90% of the cases it's possible. Okay, so this is the response that I am supposed to get. So the way you're going to write the test is this. Okay, so you say pm.response, convert that into JSON and check that this is the body. Okay, you hit enter. Okay, so again it's passing. If you change it, it will fail. So then comes, guys, response body parsing basically. So if you go to the post request, again it's very simple. So I'm just skipping it and say, okay, hey, I just need to parse it like this. Okay, it would be different in rest assured, and we're going to see that. Model state validation, again it's very important. So in here what I say is you know, the minimum length is, I guess, 4. So if I do this, okay, it says name should be 4 to 25 characters long. This is one validation. Okay, if I say I don't provide this particular field, okay, and I say Rayan, I hit enter, it says that please provide only name and gender. So these are all the different validations that I have put in place. Okay, so you also have an API when you can run your validations. Okay, persistence, that's again important test. So whenever we are posting it, so we hit send, now the record should get added. It's important that, you know, in some shape or form you check that the data is getting saved in your database. That's called as persistence. Okay, because at times, you know, what I can do is I can return the response to you from the memory itself. So I don't save anything to the database, but I respond to you back that, hey, I've saved this record. It stays there in the memory, and the day you reboot your machine, you know, it's gone from the memory. So you have to store that into the database so that it can persist. Middleware, now let me show you an example of it. So let's pick this one. Currently the response is in the JSON format. So what I can do is I'm gonna make use of a middleware which is going to transform that into XML. Okay, so I said this XML, I hit enter. Now what do you see? The response is into XML. All right, status line you're already seeing in here. Response headers, I've already shown you that X powered by. Okay, so this is something that you have to test, that X powered by should not leak the server level information. Okay, and that's pretty much it, guys. So besides these, if you have also worked on microservices architecture, then there are more concepts like API gateway, service bus, queue and topics, which we have to test with API testing. But that's a broad topic altogether, and maybe in future I'll create a dedicated series on that. Despite of being a long video, I hope you would have found it helpful and you have enjoyed it thoroughly. Thanks for watching, and feel free to join me in the next video.